So folks, my name's Chuck Bostwick. I'm the editor of the Antelope Valley Press. I was invited here by Mrs. Love to give a talk. And so I will just talk to you, I'll just tell you stories. I'm not much of a public speaker. My guess is I was invited here because for a number of years I wrote daily history stories in the Antelope Valley Press. I think I probably did about 800 of them before I ran out of both sources and time and things that were easily assembled. One of the products of all that is something, we've got some copies of these, and you guys are welcome to take these home. This is the 100th anniversary edition. The Antelope Valley Press, it was 100 years old last year. It's gone through a number of names. It's been a daily newspaper for about 25 years now. It started off as a weekly in Palmdale back in 1915. So, as I said, I'm not really a public speaker, but I'll just tell you guys a story and actually ask you for some help to see if maybe you all knew anything at all about what I'm talking about. October a year ago, I was off walking along the Pacific Crest Trail where it runs up out of Soledad Canyon. I don't know if you guys have ever been up there. There's a parking area, I think, at the Indian Canyon, and then the trail goes south from there and north across the railroad tracks. So I walked north across the railroad tracks, and you go past some torn up old trailers and junk and trash, and then you get up into the hills, and the trail winds along the sides of the hills, and I walked a mile or two up there, and I come to a rock outcropping, and I look up at the rock outcropping, and it's got a cave in it. And I thought, well, gee, I wonder what that cave's there for. I think I'll scramble up there. So I scrambled through the brush and up around and crawled into the cave, and as I'm looking at the cave, I said, well, there's smoke underneath this cave. It's not very much of a cave. It's probably only this high, but maybe 15 or 20 feet across. And it's got obviously smoke on the roof, like somebody's built a fire there. And well, I wonder who's using this. And I look and I realize, well, and the floor's all been smoothed off. There's rocks there, but there's no large rocks. It's just all medium-sized rocks that's all smoothed off. And I look at the mouth of the cave, and it's got a large rock there, maybe this big around, so quite a heavy rock that obviously somebody can move there because there's no way for a rock to get there. I thought, well, that's a funny thing for a rock to be sitting right there. Who would smooth off this floor, build a fire here, move this rock over here to the mouth of the cave? And well, what can you see up here? Because this is again right next to the Pacific Crest Trail, so it's probably 200 or 300 feet off the floor of the canyon that you're on. And so I go over there and look out the mouth of the cave, and I can see down into Soledad Canyon where the railroad runs now. You've got a great view down there. And I'm thinking, oh, well, you can just watch Soledad Canyon there. And then I remember back in my mind reading stories about Tiburcio Vasquez. And there's a story that is 1874, he and another guy named Clodovio Chavez, they'd held up a stagecoach stop up on the edge of Owens Valley, actually between Owens Valley and Ridgecrest. It's still there. It's where Highway 178 joins Highway 14 and 395, and there's a freight and stage station called Coyote Holes. Well, they held that up, shot a guy in the leg, waited till some of the wagons came, held up a mine owner who was on one of the wagons, and then took off. And so I'm thinking, well, there's a story also after that. After they left there, they had held up either a stagecoach or a freight wagon. It differs depending on which account you read. A couple miles outside of what was then known as Ravenna, which is down. I don't know which way I'm facing. This way, I think. This way towards Soledad down the road. Okay, down this way, and that they had held up this stagecoach, or as I said, also a freight wagon. I thought, well, I don't know. If I was a couple of bandits, I think I might put a rock there and look out and wait for somebody to come by, and nobody could see my head pointing out of here. I thought, well, how could you get out of here, though? So I scrambled back out, went back at the top of the hill. It's you could probably ride a horse down the back side, but I haven't been able to find any more. I can find stories, third-hand stories. I can't find wherever that original story came from to say where exactly he the holdup took place, but that's just one of my my suppositions, that it certainly could have been something that Vasquez and/or Clodovio Chavez was up there waiting for the stagecoach to go by, and that's where they've been looking from. There's no evidence. I never wrote about this. I haven't gone back up there with a metal detector to see if there might be something up there laying around. But for all I know, it was a backpacker in the 1960s, or who knows who it was. It's a funny place for anybody before the trail was built. I think the trail dates from the 50s, because I think I've got a topographic map from the 50s that shows the trail up there. Because anybody before the trail was built would have been going along the valley floor a couple hundred feet before. They wouldn't have been scrambled along far enough to get up to that cave. But I don't know. I just like that story. I like the idea of thinking that maybe this was a Vasquez hiding spot, at least for a little while, and maybe that's where the holdup took place. Like I said, I can't find the original source, where the stories in the biographies about Vasquez, where that came from. Was that something that was in a trial? Was that in a transcript? Was that something out of an old newspaper from back then? So I can't find anything more exact to pin it down. But I was wondering, any of you guys ever walk along Pacific Crest Trails? Do you guys know what I'm talking about there? No? No? Well, I'll tell you. Yeah. If you go on there, it's maybe 1.5 miles or 2 miles. I always exaggerate how far I've walked because it makes me feel better to say I've walked 5 miles than to say I've walked 2 miles. And I was actually heading for the Three Sisters rock formation a couple of miles farther. I never got that far, partly because I was fiddling around with the cave there. But I just thought that, like I said, I'm still looking through Vasquez books to see if anybody says exactly where this took place or what happened.
I live in Ravenna. I have the Ravenna Ranch. And I moved there in 1974. And I had read, and I don't know if it was the AV Press or the Signal, that the last robbery by Vasquez was in Ravenna. And he would, in fact, I was thinking it was the train. And I went down to the Historical Society in Saugus and said, that the last train, and they said, no, absolutely. It
train didn't come until 76, yeah. And he was captured in either late 74 or 75. So this was when it was the freight route from Los Angeles to the Owens Valley mines.
And I have the article. I know I saved it someplace. And I can't find it.
As a lifelong newspaper man, I'm always suspicious, at least, or skeptical, I should say, of anything that gets written down, especially because they kind of get passed on over years. And that's why I've been trying to go back to find what was where did this story first come from that said he, had done this holdup down there. And I can't remember if that was his last one or not, but it was certainly toward the end of his career, because he got captured, like I said, 74, 75 in the Los Angeles area, not too long after that.
But that's further down than Ravenna. Ravenna, and he used to, listen to me, he would rob the stagecoach or whatever, and then immediately, directly in Ravenna, go up and through the hills over to Vasquez Rocks. Because those rocks are an outcropping of the Vasquez.
Yeah, and from where I was, that trail actually leads straight into Vasquez Rocks right now. Like I said, I think there would have been an easier way to do it back in the 1870s. You wouldn't have been following the Pacific Crest Trail that runs along the side of the hill. You probably would have been down in the valley down there, and I didn't walk along there. But if you went 2 or 3 miles farther, you dive underneath the trail goes underneath the freeway, and it comes up in Vasquez Rocks County Park. And before the freeway was built, there was actually a connection there with Escondido Canyon. I don't know if you guys have ever, I'll get into another one of my stories, but there's a very narrow canyon that you can see if you crane your neck as you're going northbound on the 14 freeway, right before you get to Vasquez Rocks. You can crane your neck over this way and see some rock outcroppings, and there's a very narrow, shallow canyon with a cave in there, and that was part of Escondido Canyon, and which was I've seen referred to as one of the places that Vasquez would hide out in, and the freeway has covered up the connection between it and the rest of the park, the rest of the rock outcroppings. But anyway, so there's two culverts underneath the freeway right there at Vasquez Rocks. And you guys, people ever walk through the culverts there? Okay, well, when my kids were younger, I would drag them around all over the place, and we would go walk through them. So one of them has the Pacific Crest Trail that runs through it, and the creek that runs through Escondido Canyon actually makes this real sharp U. So it comes out from the southeast, comes up underneath the freeway, goes into amongst some of the rock formations, turns around very sharply, and goes back underneath the freeway and out Escondido Canyon. And so if you're willing to like scramble over rocks and through some water and avoid the poison oak that got me once, you can scramble through this second culvert. And so my kids and I have done this, and it's probably been 15 years ago now. We go through there, and we come out, and it's a pretty cool place. I'm probably on somebody's private property by the time you get over there, because you're on the south side of the freeway, and it's rock walls maybe 100 feet tall, very close together. And right as you come out, there's a dished out cave, just like those caves are in Vasquez Rocks. And so I come around there, and I look, and it's got cave paintings. It's got, essentially Neanderthal style cave paintings of the kind you've seen. If you've ever seen pictures of the cave paintings, prehistoric cave paintings in France, that's what they are. There's a prehistoric buffalo and what else? I think there's a mastodon or two painted on the walls. And so I've never found out for sure what those are. I've been told that those are results of a movie made in the 1950s, that some movie crew had painted those on there, and they've just stayed over the last half century, that they were making this movie before the freeway came through, and that was part of, I don't know, that's just another thing.
Sarah Brewer talked about that.
Did she?
Yes, and I guess there's the real cave with the real paintings.
There's the real rock art in
Vasquez. And then
Vasquez,
there's the movie one. And
yeah.
she says that when she takes tours, she guides the tours and shows them that cave. You might want to talk to her about that.
And is she with out at the
Vasquez?
That one of the doses?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, like I said, does she say that that's what it is? It was a movie?
She did.
Okay, yeah, that's the story. I don't know what movie it's supposed to be or anything like that. But yeah, it's pretty astounding when you come out and then here's these Neanderthal cave paintings there, and
that is an exact duplicate of the one that the original was discovered in France in 1946. This thing's supposed to be an exact duplicate.
yeah, that's what they look like. Yeah.
Yeah. And I heard that it was a class project from some university.
Oh, I don't know.
So who knows?
Who knows? See, that's it. And I'm trying to think. It's probably from her or from somebody who she got it from that said it was a movie. I don't know. I just know that.
Yeah, nobody knows for sure, but it's neat.
It is neat. Yeah, that whole canyon's neat there. So, are you folks mostly longtime Acton residents? How many have been here? More than 20 years? More than 20 years? Oh, not everybody. Well, that's more than 40 years? Oh, there's a couple. You said you were since 65, so
Right.
So it's changed a lot since right when the freeway was getting built. Was when you moved in.
Right. We were in total denial.
Of whether the freeway was going to come through.
Definitely not coming. Remember that?
No, yeah. Okay. And so, do you guys? What's your interest in history? Do you try to do research of what's going on? Yeah.
We moved up to Agua Dulce 5 years ago. My sister's been in Agua Dulce as a horse trainer for 19 years.
Oh boy.
We just like the area. But when we moved up here, we're both sort of history buffs, and we want to know where we live. We want to know the history, so that's why we came here.
Oh, all right, good. Well, and as I mentioned before, I was doing lots of history stories for the Antelope Valley Press. I was doing one a day, and they started off they started off with the stories I'd heard from the old timers who I'd worked with at the Valley Press. Because I moved up here in '85. I moved to Palmdale in '85. My wife had grown up here. Her dad was an aircraft worker. And so when we started having kids, we moved back up and bought a house. I went to work for the Valley Press in '85. I was there for a few years. Went to work for the LA Daily News. Was there for quite a while, and then came back to the Valley Press not quite 10 years ago. And so back in '85, there's a couple of the old timers. One who's still around, who's Vern Lawson, who's now 90. He'd been here since '49. And another guy named Bill Gillis, who, if you were a long-time Valley resident, you remember reading his columns because he was a sports columnist and the police reporter. And he always knew stories. So when I started off writing the stories, the history stories, a lot of them were the ones that I remember Bill Gillis talking about. Being a police reporter, a lot of those were, the murders from, 1957 and stuff like that. But then I was also searching every sort of source I could find for even older things. And I really liked the stories from the 1800s, from, when the railroad came through in 1876, the few stories you could gather before then from, say, the earliest of the permanent Anglo or Californio settlers in the 1850s and the 1860s. And then the start of the towns of Antelope Valley after the railroad land grants were given out, starting in the 1880s. That's how Lancaster started, how Palmdale started. There were other colonies, they called them, that didn't survive the bad drought of the 1890s. But anyway, I find the Antelope Valley's history just fascinating. I mean, just the bits and pieces that you find of the Antelope Valley, where it connects to every place else. One of the things I found astounding was that in 1844, explorer John C. Fremont and Kit Carson, a mountain man who most people even now have remembered, Kit Carson, and some other famous mountain men, came through in an expedition. This was before California was even part of the United States. They were looking to see if there was a river outlet from the Rocky Mountains through the Sierras to the Pacific Ocean. There wasn't. But after crossing the Sierra and then coming back down to San Joaquin Valley, they ended up crossing the Antelope Valley, and they came through what is now Lake Elizabeth. And I thought it was fascinating that they probably came within a mile or so of my house in Palmdale because of their description of where they went to. I went and found a place where they had camped. If any of you guys know about the so-called castle out near the Poppy Reserve, there's a springs out there, and there's Indian rock painting, and from the description in Fremont's journal, that's where they camped one night. They crossed over where Munn's Ranch Road is, went by Lake Elizabeth, and then followed what's now the valley where Elizabeth Lake Road runs, and then they came out and said they crossed through a brushy defile, and until just a few years ago when Elizabeth Lake got widened, that's what the exit to that canyon looked like, just a half mile from my house. And so they talked about they emerged from there into Joshua trees, and there's still some surviving Joshua trees there, and then proceeded off eastward across the Antelope Valley. And there's some things that changed and some things that have stayed the same. It was this time of year when they came through, and it was obviously a good poppy year, as we call it, because they said that Fremont wrote that they could see bands of orangish color from miles off. And he thought that it was sandstone rock formations, but when they got closer, they found out that it was poppies, actually, and that what they were looking at is the place where the Poppy Reserve right now. They said they'd emerged from a forest of Joshua trees, and I think he called them yucca, because almost everybody called them yucca. He also called them the most repulsive plant in the vegetable kingdom. So he was not a fan of Joshua trees. I actually had one growing in my backyard that my son gave to me as a present, so I don't agree with him. But so he immersed in that, they found the poppies, and then as they were going up along what's now Elizabeth Lake Road, there's more wildflowers all along there because he spoke about all the different colors that are there. And then they came out onto the Antelope Valley floor, and from there they moved across and moved out into San Bernardino County, and they were talking about how much, where the water was running. So it was a rainy year, and it was, I believe it was April '44 that they came through. And so there was water where, certainly where Big Rock Creek is and Mescal Creek. And actually it was an episode a couple of days later that made Carson famous, and the reason we still know him, because they, the explorers, and this is a big bunch that I think it was over 80 people that he had with him, of all sorts. I think he said that they had an ex-Prussian soldier with them, they had Indians, they had former fur trappers, they had regular army soldiers. But anyway, they're going through San Bernardino County out in approximately the Barstow area, and they encounter a man and a boy. And the man and the boy tells them that they were bringing horses from New Mexico to Southern California, and that they were attacked by Indians, and that these two were able to escape, but they had to leave behind the boy's mother and father. And so so Kit Carson, another mountain man, his name was Godoy, and who later had a ranch up by where the Cajon Pass is now. They said they'd go help him go look, see what had happened, and they end up trailing the Indian band almost to the Nevada border, actually. Ends up finding where they're camped, and these Indians are California desert Indians, so they don't ride horses, they eat horses. They are cooking the horses. And so this being 1844 and them being mountain men, they attacked the Indians, shot a couple of them, captured the horses back, and drove them back to where the boy, they couldn't find the boy's mother and father, so they were assumed to have been killed. But it was that whole account was told in Fremont's journal of his expedition, and that was one of the reasons why Kit Carson became a national name even in the 1840s, because of this, these two heroic mountain men who are attacking this band of Indians to help the poor orphan boy. So that was, and like I said, I just think that's fascinating. Here's a little bit of American history that passed by a mile from my house there in Palmdale. Acton, best of my knowledge, started off with a copper mine around 1860s or so. I noticed that you had one of my stories about Ravenna in there. So they started off, they were going to call it Soledad, but there already was a Soledad, and so they called it Ravenna. I think one of the partners that put up the money to get the mine going, or the mine machinery going, was named Ravenna. And then from there, what put it on even more on the map is after the discovery, because the copper mine didn't last for very long. In the 1860s, there was discovery of silver up in the Owens Valley. One of those was called Cerro Gordo. If you're ever anybody who drives through the Owens Valley, you'll often see that on the map. There's Cerro Gordo, and that's Fat Hill, and that's on the back side or the east side of Owens Lake. Well, that had been the silver deposit had been discovered, and the closest outlet for that silver was to haul them by mule team down into Los Angeles. So in the 1860s, a man named Nadeau, who also actually became one of the major businessmen of Los Angeles, he started hauling the silver by mule team, by mule wagon, from Owens Valley through the Antelope Valley to Los Angeles. And before Nadeau, the way through the mountains to the south of us was not along Soledad Canyon where the railroad runs, but it was up San Francisco Canyon Road. So that was the standard route, is you would go over San Fernando Pass, Newhall Pass as it is now, which was much taller and steeper. You go, and if you've ever noticed, there's still part of a early attempt to make it less steep, called Beale's Cut. Have you guys seen Beale's Cut? Yes. Oh, so I don't know if Beale's Cut. Okay. I haven't ever walked over there because I think it's quite a bit fallen down. But that's a very old thing that was in the 1850s, I think. Made, deepened a couple of times. But anyway, that used to be the old route. You'd go through that. You'd go up San Francisco Canyon, which was as bad then as it is now, crossing the road, the creek innumerable times, come out where Elizabeth Lake Road is, or Elizabeth Lake is, go over what's now Munn's Ranch Road, and then cut kind of northwest across the Antelope Valley over to where Fort Tejon is, and now Tejon Pass and Interstate 5. Well, in the 1850s, while the U.S. was looking for ways to run railroads to the Pacific, there had been an Army surveying outfit that had come through the Antelope Valley and that had gone up Soledad Canyon and decided that would be a better railroad route than trying to go up San Francisco or over what's now Tejon Pass. So anyway, Nadeau starts running his mule team up Soledad and Canyon, and he established an ingenious system so that he didn't have one driver and one set of teams taking a wagon the whole route between Los Angeles and Owens Valley. He sent the wagons along, but the drivers and the teams stayed on one particular stretch. So there was, say, one of his stage stops was at Alpine, which is right near where the Sierra Highway crosses the railroad track south of Palmdale. He had one stop right there. He had another stop at a place I've never been able to find called Cow Holes. I don't know where Cow Holes is. He had another stop at what's now Willow Springs. It's not the present stone buildings that are called Willow Springs. Those date from the 1890s, but it was an earlier stage stop. And he had these 1 day's journey apart. And so a driver and a team of mules would take the wagon from one station to the next one. They'd be unhitched. The mules and driver would stay until the next wagon was coming down the other direction. They'd take that one back. So you've got this back and forth kind of progression while the teams went northbound. And then again in 1876, that only happened from about 1868 to about 1876, which is when the railroad came through. And I like the story of the railroad because it was the only reason the railroad comes through here, and the only reason Los Angeles has a railroad or had a railroad built in 1876 is because the voters of Los Angeles voted a subsidy to what's now Southern Pacific to build it. That the railroad had no interest in going to Los Angeles. They wanted to run. They already had one route across the Central Sierra, and if they built one across the Southern Sierra, they were just going to run it straight out to the Colorado River. They weren't going to cut it south because it was expensive. There's another chain of mountains right there. So there's actually a subsidy. The voters also decided to give the small short line railroad that was in Los Angeles to whatever railroad built its way in there. So that's how they came through. So they spent a long time, I can't remember how many months now, I think it was well over a year, building what's now called the San Fernando Tunnel underneath Newhall Pass. And if any of you ever ride Metrolink, you can still, that's the same tunnel that was built by Blasting and Pix in 1875 and 1876. The same tunnel is right there. That might be my list of history of Acton. I brought along a bunch of my stories, so in case I was compelled to talk anymore, I could just run through batches of them. But as I said, oh, yes, ma'am.
I have two questions.
Certainly.
We've heard tell that back in the early 1900s, there was some sort of a huge mental hospital way out in.
East, or sorry, west.
West of, like,
Current, is it the
Lancaster?
Sierra Highway?
Okay.
and the foundations are still there. We actually went
All right.
out and we found
Did
foundations.
you find the foundations? It's not a mental hospital.
Okay.
And I'm pretty sure what you're talking about is tuberculosis
Okay.
facility. There were, in fact, that is a famous place. I'm sure that's the Kroger's tuberculosis hospital. Yes, that's always been called the mental hospital. There's a guy who actually became a USC football star named Antelope Al Kruger. Because now I'm trying to remember the exact what he did. I think he caught like the winning touchdown pass in 1939 Rose Bowl, but I might be wrong here. But anyway, he was a football star at USC. His family owned the tuberculosis sanitarium. That's what they called them. They were sanitariums. And because we had several out here, that's why, well, now I start talking to people like, so that's why Miraloma Jail is there. Nobody knows that Miraloma Jail is there because it's been closed for years. But anyway, yeah, so his family owned one. There was another one at what is now 25th Street West in Avenue J8, which is where Desert Christian High School is, which caused some consternation when I wrote about that one among parents of Desert Christian High School students. And then the county had, the county opened a tuberculosis jail for recalcitrant tuberculosis patients at 60th West and Avenue I. And so that was originally, that had started off as a training base before World War II. And then it became a jail and a hospital, and then it was a jail and had a separate hospital, which was later called High Desert Hospital because people didn't want to go to Miraloma Hospital when it was next door to Miraloma Jail. But that's what it was. It was a family-run tuberculosis sanitarium because this was an area where people with tuberculosis would come out because they thought the weather was better for them. And by the way, one of the families who came out here because of the weather was Richard Nixon's family. Richard Nixon's family had lived in the Antelope Valley for just a real brief time, I'm pretty sure less than a year, just some sort of isolated cabin when he was a boy because his older brother had tuberculosis and in fact died at a real young age. They were only here for a little while and then they moved to Arizona, I can't remember where, but and his mom would take care of his brother who had tuberculosis and I think he died when he was just in his early 20s. So. Okay, yeah, Antelope Al Kruger, and he was just like I said, he was. I think it was the '39 Rose Bowl. And as I said, there's being my background, because of my sources, which are mostly the newspapers, my history stories tend to be toward the gruesome side of it. Okay. So I've written about several of the train crashes. Train crashes were big news, and I could usually find out about them because people up here would take pictures of snow. You know, you get that picture of snow on the Lancaster Boulevard. Everybody brought their cameras out and took pictures when there's a big snow, so you could always judge years by what snow fell. So and then train crashes. When trains would crash, whoever had a camera seemed to go out there and take a picture in the following days. So there was a couple of bad ones around here. There's one tragic one where a newlywed couple, she was like a teenage bride and they'd eloped and they'd run off to Southern California and got married and now they're coming back. And so the train had been stopped at Acton I think to take on fuel. And I'm thinking it was coal at the time, but now I can't remember. But the train crew hadn't pulled it far enough away, and so the back car was still out onto the track, and another train came along and smashed into it and killed the young woman. I think the young man was injured. And actually, my favorite of the train disasters is one that happened over near where it's not actually Acton, it's over there at Santa Clarita now. It's near where the Sauga Speedway was, or is. Is Sauga Speedway still there? I'm very parochial, I hardly ever get out of Palmville anymore. Okay, so it was still there in the 30s. Well, anyway, the train is traveling along one night, and it derails. And a man comes on, And at first people think he's a police detective. Well, it turns out he is in fact a train robber. So there's a train robbery in the 1830s, in the 1930s in Southern California. And so he robs the passengers on the train, takes off, and eventually a man was caught and believed to be him. I think they caught him in Montana. But what he had done is he had pulled out some of the spikes for the train and for the rails, and when the train came along, it derailed, and he was able to go over there and rob the passengers. And he'd had a history of doing that before the guy they ended up arresting. I don't think he was ever convicted for the Southern California, but they convicted him for another train robbery. But there's pictures of the train, I think of the locomotive off the tracks, and there's the Saugus Speedway, and it was called something else then, visible in the background.
That was Buffalo Bill Vernon.
Yes, Vernon, yes.
You know how he got away? How they escaped?
I think he hitched a ride with some unsuspecting
He told
doofus.
somebody at a garage that his daughter was in a hospital in Los Angeles, and he begged for a ride and paid the guy, and the guy gave him a ride to LA to get away. He eventually was caught and sent
Was it
to prison.
Montana? I think it was Montana or Wyoming. It was or up
There's
north.
a few articles about him in the Santa Clarita Historical
Yeah,
Society.
yeah, they've got so much stuff on their website.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was kind of poaching. It wasn't really Antelope Valley history. I declared it Antelope Valley history because I think there was a college girl from Lancaster that was on the train, and so who was quoted in some of the newspaper accounts of that.
Was it Benelli Stadium?
It might have been Benelli Stadium. That's what it seems to me that it was there. So I thought, I was interested. I thought, wow, that thing's really old, man. Who's coming up here in the 1930s to watch whatever they're watching there? And whenever I ride the Metrolink, I'd always think of that as we go past there. And this is right where the train got derailed, right here, right by the last of the train robbers.
It was a big rodeo. I've seen pictures where there's a traffic jam going, in the 30s, going to Benelli Stadium.
Oh, it had to be because there's only a 2-lane road to get there. Yeah. In fact, there is a tiny little road right off Pear Blossom Highway, right near its junction with Sierra Highway, and right where the railroad tracks come across. It's called Old Nadeau Road, and I've always been fascinated by that. I don't know if that's called Old Nadeau Road because that's in fact some old mule team path that somebody paved 80 years ago, or what it is, but I just thought that was remarkable that there's a Nadeau Road right there and this stuff came through. Let's see. Oh, I know, the Joshua trees. Who knows the story of the Joshua tree? The Joshua tree pulp mill? We're going to make Joshua trees into newspaper pulp and ship them to England.
Oh, yeah.
All right,
Yeah.
so that's, I don't know if there's still any remnants of that, but there was a mill. Supposedly it was a part of the original gold mill that was converted in the 1880s to like I said, convert Joshua trees into pulp for English newspapers, and thus the name of the newspaper changes in whatever account, but it's pretty sure that that's really true. And there's pictures around. Have you ever seen any of those pictures? There's pictures around of Chinese workers in this mill processing the Joshua tree stalks or trunks. But what had happened is after the railroads came through, they had lots of land that they were allowed to sell, and some company bought up lots of acreage and started harvesting Joshua trees to feed this pulp mill. It never worked out, and there's different stories. It made dark newsprint, the pulp got spoiled, any of this stuff. What I thought was astounding is that the pictures of the mill show it operated by a water wheel. Now, I don't know how much rain was falling in the 1880s. 1880s was a wet decade, or before, that would make that people would think there's enough water down in the Santa Clara River, or I'm assuming in Mill Creek, in Mill Canyon over here, that it would operate a water wheel. But that's another thing I'm fascinated, that they had a mill, and it had a water wheel on it, and I guess it did some work at all, because nobody said it was because they ran out of water, but yeah.
That was at the corner of Mill Creek and Soliday.
Is that where it was?
On Pulsarosa, yeah. Just
Is there anything left of it over there? Can you tell?
There used to be a huge, great big rock wall, I mean, probably 20 feet tall, going around the corner. I don't know, since Pulsarosa opened up, I don't know if it's still there or not. I know that
And
John...
Pulsarosa's the movie ranch that's out there.
And he discouraged people going on his property. And then he died, so I don't know what's happened to it.
And there's another story about that. I think there's a wreckage of a B-25 at that canyon too, at least bits of the wreckage of it. That was in the early 60s. It was a fire, air tanker fighting a forest fire up there, and it had crashed killed the two pilots while they were fighting the fire there. I think it was 60 or 62. But anyway, yeah, 1960, B-25, July 1960, Mill Canyon, so supposedly it's up there. I don't know how much bits and pieces of it, but actually there's bits and pieces of airplane crashes all over the Antelope Valley, most of them from World War II, because there was lots of plane crashes there, but there's others every place.
Foxfield really involved with World War II, like a stopping place or something?
No, that's the old Miraloma, what's now, what became Miraloma Jail.
Foxfield?
Foxfield didn't get built until the late 50s or the early 60s as an LA County project. But what's now Miraloma, so there's still original buildings from the World War II era there at 60th West and I. Not the state prison that's at J, but north of there, there's barbed wire and towers, and there's some really old buildings from the 1940s there. And so it was a private firm that had built that because they were hired to train English pilots. And this was starting about, I think they started in 40, it might have been 41. Because of course, England's having a war, there's no place to train novice pilots over England, so they were shipped over here. And so there was there's runways there, hangars, and you know, underpowered training planes there, and there's British cadets there. The British cadets stayed there for a couple of years, you know, going in and out until the United States entered the war, and then eventually the United States to the war. That's how it got the Miraloma Jail. It was originally called War Eagle Field, but then a company who also operated a training base down at the community of Miraloma over where LA and Riverside County comes together, had bought it, and so it somehow absorbed that Miraloma story. And I don't know if any of you guys ever participated in the haunted hangar, haunted houses the sheriff's department used to put up. It would have been in probably the early 90s. The sheriff's department, when they were still running as a jail, would have put on a haunted house for kids. And so one of their stories was of the headless airman who was haunting, you know, Miraloma. That was one of the stories they'd have as part of the scenario for this haunted jail they'd have. Well, it turns out that not the haunting so much, but the headless airman story was true. There was an airman, one of the trainees, one of the British trainees, who had stepped in front of a propeller and been killed by that. Well, so his name was Himmelstab, and he was I think he was a Polish Jew, not a German Jew, I think he was a Polish Jew, and he had escaped from Poland after the Nazi conquest, got to England, signed up with the RAF, got shipped to America to learn how to fly. He's out in the desert, and he dies in Lancaster training to fly. So he is buried out at Lancaster Cemetery. Just a few years ago, some of the local history buffs in the cemetery had his grave redone, I think they had the Royal Air Force, some Royal Air Force representatives out for them. But yeah, you can go look at Himmelstad's. In fact, Dale DeBride, who runs the Lancaster Cemetery, I'm sure would be glad to show that to you because she's very good about keeping up with history and finding out everything she can about it. And but yeah, that's just another story of the Antelope Valley. Here's a guy who signed up to fight, and he ends up dying in the Mojave Desert. I don't know how many thousand miles from home. Yes, ma'am.
I used to do a historical haunt, an old ghost walk down in Moore Park before we moved here. And one of the stories that I actually got from the Santa Clarita Valley Historical Society page, which I thought was really odd, but talking about the San Francisco Dam break and how they ran out of places to put the bodies, and they took them over the pass from Fillmore into Moore Park and lined them along Old High Street.
I can believe that.
And how the ghosts of the people who were never claimed,
Oh,
that
still
to be heard
there.
at night, blah, blah, blah. It was really wonderful. It was a wonderful story. But my question, I guess, is why Santa Clarita Valley? Why Santa Clarita Valley Historical Society? Is it because they're so wonderful? I mean, it really is a
No.
wonderful
Okay,
site.
so do you know the story of
I
San
do, but
Francisco Dam?
I was under
Oh,
the
yes,
impression
yes.
that it sort of turned and went sort of along the 126.
It did,
you know?
but see,
It
it
did.
came right
Yeah.
through Santa Clarita because it's
It
up
did.
there in San Francisco Canyon. And I think there's still chunks of concrete up there. In fact, they're getting ready to name it a national monument. But anyway, there's still the two powerhouses up
Right.
there. And it was above the lower powerhouse, the one closer to Santa Clarita. So the dam breaks in the middle of the night. The wall of water comes through down San Francisco Canyon Road. It comes through, I guess it comes through Saugus. It comes right through Saugus. There is now a park. Now I can't remember. Tesoro Park. I don't know if you've ever been to Tesoro Park. There's an adobe building there.
So divided, yeah.
Tesoro divided.
Harry Carey.
It's a Harry Carey, movie actor Harry Carey. You probably know who Harry Carey Jr. is. Harry Carey Sr. had built this ranch house there. It comes through their property. The Careys are away, but I think it might have killed some of their workers there.
Killed some of their workers.
Killed some of their workers. The Navajos, didn't they have Navajos who had a trading post there? But anyway, it comes straight through there, comes through Santa Clarita, down San Francisco Canyon, hits the Santa Clara River, makes a right turn, and heads all the way out to the Pacific Ocean, causing destruction. So they,
Right.
yes,
Yeah, I
Santa
know the rest of
Clarita,
it.
yeah, Santa Clarita would claim that as theirs because that's where it made the right turn.
I got some wonderful stories from that site that I worked into my ghost walk in Moore Park. I thought it
Yeah,
was just
yeah.
wonderful.
No, they have a lot of stuff because they've been gathering that stuff for years, and it's all on there. And I just think it's great, all that stuff they have.
At least when I was growing up, they didn't teach it in LA Unified Public School.
What's that?
When I was growing up, they did not teach
No,
it.
no. It's really just gotten
I
recognition.
didn't know until I moved out this
No,
way.
it's gotten recognition in the last few years as the worst man-made disaster in California,
Right.
perhaps the
Moving a
worst
lot.
disaster of any sort outside the San Francisco earthquake of 1906. Yeah. And I don't know if anybody ever figured out what the death total was.
Yeah, I believe in terms of loss of life, it was number 2 in the state of California for a cataclysmic event.
Yeah,
Being
yeah.
either, man or natural.
It had something to do with Mulholland.
Yes, that's why you
Yeah,
yes,
that's the end of
it ruined
There's
his.
a book that his granddaughter wrote about 10 years ago, which, if you're into it, is definitely worth reading.
Okay.
Oh yeah, there's several books that have come out just within the last couple of years as people started paying attention to it. But yeah, that ruined his reputation.
Yeah.
And just caused a general freak out in California about dams. Because of that, the Little Rock Dam had a years-long fight over whether they could build that, and in fact, not only years-long, but decades-long. The thing was built in the 20s after a much struggle and political maneuvering, and it was actually reinforced in the 1990s finally, because the state was just never convinced that the Little Rock Dam was sturdy enough. And
I don't blame them.
yeah.
I was just thinking, I knew that Mulholland built the San Francisco Dam. I just wondered, did he go on to build other?
No,
That was it?
I think that was pretty much it. I
You
think
go
he
up
just
to
had-
Hollywood Hills.
Yeah, but it was a
Still
That was
stands.
before, because I
It
was
was
thinking, I wonder if
It's
they
a
kept it.
backup because ever since they built the aqueduct, the various parts of the aqueduct were being attacked. From Muscatmore's Valley.
And so after the St. Francis Dam gives way, that's when Bouquet Reservoir, which is up on Bouquet Canyon Road, that's when it was built. That's also on the Los Angeles Aqueduct, and that's a different construction. That's not a concrete dam. That's an earthen dam, but that's the replacement. Yeah, yeah.
How about aeronautics in Antelope Valley? There have been some historical milestones.
Oh, everything you can think of in the Antelope Valley. In fact, when I started writing these, the publisher said, now don't just be writing everything about aerospace. Okay, I won't write everything about aerospace. But yeah.
It like all started there.
It all started there. Well, we didn't have writing about it, but we had everybody else. Charles Lindbergh landed in the Antelope Valley. He was, after his famous flight across the Atlantic, he embarked on a kind of a boost aviation flight around the United States. And he was so famous that people would turn out to see this, that he was going to be at, Santa Monica at 2 p.m. on February 23rd. Thousands of people would show up. He'd fly in the spirit of St. Louis, and he did this all around the country. Well, he's on one leg. He's running a little bit early before wherever he had to be, so he sat down on what's now Edwards Air Force Base. It was just lake beds then, and he just landed on, I think he landed on Muroc, near the town of, which is now Rogers Dry Lake, and which is now Muroc, which was then called Muroc, and he just landed there to wait for a while. And I think that there was, like one old miner or something was his only welcoming committee, as opposed to the thousands of people who'd come out any place. But yeah, and I'll tell you, one of the things that has always fascinated me is, I mentioned how many airplane crashes there were. I counted up at one point, and I can't remember, there's hundreds of airplane crashes around here. Most of those were during World War II, because Edwards had been established as a gunnery range back in the 30s by the Army Air Corps, and then it expanded during World War II. They had it both as a secret test base and as a training base, and it was used for America's first jet fighter. It was used because it had those big flat lake beds, which were just wonderful ready-made landing strips, especially for the early jets, who had very temperamental engines, not very much power, they could quit, and so you had this extra margin of safety if you were taken off from the lake bed, because you could set it down any place within miles and you'd be okay. But there was, beyond that, there were also training operations going on, and so you had pilots in B-24s and B-25s, you had P-38 pilots flying out of there. Mojave had its own Marine Corps training base, so there are F-4s, Corsairs flying out of there, there are F-6F Wildcats flying out of there, and they were just planes all over the place here. And as I'm doing my history of the Antelope Valley, and I'm always looking at old newspapers, and I'd go through the microfilms, and I'd have a hard time finding stories about crashes. And when you did find stories, they'd be on page 3, and it's like, an F-104 fighter jet crashed on the Plant 42 runway, killing its pilot. He is survived by his wife and 3 daughters. Services will be Tuesday. And that would be what it would say, and it would be that long. And I thought, the jet, it crashed on the runway, and that's the only thing you got is 3 paragraphs over there? Well, then I realized that they'd gone through all those years where sometimes there'd be 2 and 3 fatal crashes a day from around the Antelope Valley. All of guys that weren't from here, and there was no way anybody could keep track, so it just became kind of a matter of course. And, oh, yes, a military jet has crashed, and well, life goes on. But yeah, there were just crashes all over the place. In fact, there was just remains recovered from one of those crashes just maybe 10 years ago. It was a B-24. It wasn't out of Edwards, but it was on a training flight, and it crashed outside Mojave. Well, there's always wreck chasers around, guys who go out and try to find parts from old airplane crashes. and somebody had been out there looking and came across, in fact, a dog tag and bits of the plane, and then they started finding bits of bones. So once they start finding bits of bones, that means, oh, we better tell somebody. So they actually had one of the, there's a military unit, the same one that goes, say, to Vietnam and looks for MIA remains, come out there, sift into the soil, try to come up with as many, you know, the remains they had, and took them off for and I cannot remember, but for proper disposal. I don't know if they were trying to, if they ever tried to find exactly whose bones they were, because everybody knew who was on the plane. There was no mystery, and this was during the war when I said planes were crashing all the time. So you'd send the, you know, whoever was out there would go up and pick all the bodies up, or what bodies they could find, and they weren't making sure they got every bone out. But I mean, that's the other. I have another. One of the guys in town, he actually got put into the backseat of a sheriff's car a few years ago because he was off looking for a wreck, and he ended up finding a place where another bomber had crashed in one of the buttes east of Lancaster. And from there, he calls and says, hey, there's human remains up here. I'm over here at this bomber site, and there's human remains. So before the sheriff's department, the deputies who finally responded 30 miles out in the middle of nowhere, finally figured out what was going on, they had him in the back of the seat of the patrol car trying to explain, no, I don't say that there's a body there. This is an old crash. This is a crash from 60 years ago. I didn't kill anybody and bury him right there. They're just here. So if you ask everyone in the Bob Alvis, he'll tell you about the time he was in the back seat of the patrol car, trying to explain why he found the remains up there. But yeah, and just think of every X-15s, the first supersonic flight, all those X-15 flights, and you guys know that Neil Armstrong lived here. That's why we got Armstrong Flight Research Center. He was before he was selected as an astronaut, he'd been a test pilot. And in fact, this is again my connection to the macabre, and is that his toddler daughter is buried at the other Lancaster Cemetery at Joshua Memorial Park because she died of brain cancer when she was 3 or 4 years old. And one of his biographers thinks that might have been something that led him to say, I'm going to go and become an astronaut. I'm tired of my test pilot work. And in fact, during the time when she was sick, there were some questionable incidents of his flying. He got a plane stuck in a dry lake bed out in Nevada. He'd missed his turn on an X-15. There's a story that he was one of the X-15 pilots. I don't know if you guys know, the X-15 was a rocket plane. It was meant to test the hypersonic speeds, exceptionally high speeds. It was slung underneath a B-52 bomber, flown up to altitude, and then dropped. It would ignite its rocket engine. It would reach speeds of I can't remember, Mach 6.7, and I've now forgotten how fast Mach 6.7 is, 6.7 times the speed of sound, over 4,000 miles an hour anyway, and then would glide back to land at the lake bed at Edwards. Well, on one of those flights, Armstrong's at the controls. He's dropped someplace over Utah, Nevada. He lights his rocket engine, but as he's coming back for a landing, he misses his turn, and he goes farther than they expected. The story is that he made his turn, finally made the turn to get back to Edwards over the Rose Bowl. And I went and tried to plot out where his coordinates were by latitude and longitude. And if that's an exaggeration, it's not an exaggeration by very much. He was on the other side of the San Gabriel Mountains when he finally turned around. And so then meanwhile, all the fighter jets that are flying chase, watch him, are trying to figure out where he's gone to. The emergency crews are in the wrong place. So he ends up landing on a different part of the lake bed, and everybody has to scramble to get it. He brings it in safe, but the joke was they asked him, how much clearance over the Joshua trees did you have? How much clearance from the Joshua trees did you have when you finally made it back? And the joke was, about 50 feet on either side, because that's how low he was when we finally came in. But so anyway, he had first lived over. He had a rental house out in a alfalfa field, And then he and his wife had bought a cabin up in Juniper Hills. I never figured out where in Juniper Hills it is, but they bought a cabin up there. It didn't have any electricity. I don't think it had running water when they were there. He put in the electricity. He did a lot of work on it. They had a son when they moved in there, and then they had a little girl. Well, she started having problems. In fact, that her mom was helping with the aqua. This was a children's water performance. They used to do it, of course, on Park swimming pool. And her mom was helping with that. When she started having this trouble, she couldn't focus on things. She'd trip and fall. And it was just all a heartbreaking story. And finally, when she was 3 or 4 years old, she had died of a brain tumor that no one was able to operate on. She was buried out at Joshua Memorial Park. And so supposedly when Armstrong would come back to visit the valley, after he became an astronaut, after he would make stops over there to where her grave is. And like I said, her name was Muffy. So if you go out there and see a little girl's grave with the name of Muffy, Armstrong, with the name of Muffy on there, that's her. Another story is that the carpoolers, this isn't one of my stories, this is one of his biographer's stories, is that Armstrong was kind of a frightening person to drive with for the other people who carpooled. He carpooled with other pilots and other employees out there. Is that, you know, he was just too bored by the idea of driving, so that he was never exactly paying attention to what was going on the road. And so that this one woman was driving and says, you know, he'd start theorizing on whether the snow level was always at the same spot on the mountains as he's driving along, and he'd be wandering back and forth like this, instead of paying attention to what he was doing driving there. Another one of our famous, you guys know the Pancho Barnes stories? Pancho Barnes, you do, because you're a newspaper person, but Pancho Barnes is another aviation legend from the Antelope Valley. She was from a very well-to-do Pasadena family. She married a minister, but she didn't want to be a minister's wife. She learned how to fly. She was a stunt pilot in some of the real early flying movies. The story was that she'd run guns to revolutionaries in Mexico. Well, she ends up separating from her husband, the minister, the first of, I think, 5 husbands she had. And she moves with her young son to the desert, and she establishes what starts off as a dairy ranch, an alfalfa ranch, and eventually becomes a dude ranch and a hotel kind of thing with its own runway, and it became the hangout for all the test pilots from the late 40s through the 50s. Famously, Chuck Yeager, who broke the sound barrier at Edwards, which was still New York in 1947, was riding one of her horses one night with his wife when he gets knocked off and breaks a rib the night before his flight, that he ends up breaking the sound barrier, and then he has to cover up his injury with the help of his flight mechanic. But anyway, Pancho was around here until her death in the 70s. And one of my predecessors, I mentioned when I first started talking, Vern Lawson, who was editor at the Valley Press and at other newspapers here, he told me that one day he's walking along Lancaster Boulevard, and this must have been in the 50s, and he's still a young man, and Pancho's middle-aged at least, and Pancho starts talking to me, and he says, she used the F word so often that I thought that everybody in town had heard, because Pancho had a famously vulgar mouth, and Yeager in his biography said she swore more than any of those fighter pilots had ever heard, and that was saying quite a bit. But again, she was a legend. She was a racing pilot at the same time as in the 30s. She set records, and then she ended up here where she was just a legend. Her final husband survived her by years and years, and just died a few years ago. And if you ever was driving up on Highway 14, almost to Red Rock Canyon, he lived in a converted railroad Pullman car that was at where Cantilla is, where Jawbone Canyon store is. And he lived there for years and was always trying to interest somebody in making a movie out of Pancho's life. And never really succeeded in to any benefit of him. There's been some that have been made. Valerie Bertinelli played Pancho Barnes, was all of us old-timers thought was just travesty. Valerie Bertinelli portrayed Pancho Barnes, and I think it was Kentucky portrayed the Antelope Valley. And so I thought, well, those are pretty much, equally wrong portrayals of
There's been a couple of good
in recent years. That's
documentaries made about
Yeah.
her life.
Yeah, that's since Mackes died. Yeah, that's yes. I think they might have used some of his stuff finally after he died. Some of that he had those boxes and boxes of stuff.
She was not African at the end. She
Oh.
lost there.
She lost it because yes. So that was part of the story. Is that one of the generals? Some of the generals she'd get along with. One of them she didn't. He declared the place off limits. He said it was a little more than a brothel. The Air Force decided they wanted to expand Edwards because her ranch was right on what is now Edwards Air Force Base. There were lawsuits. The place caught on fire. It burned down. There was horrible, drawn-out court battles all over the thing. So she ended up living by North Edwards or Boron, kind of in a trailer, which is where she died, and with a whole bunch of dogs, little dogs. You know the story about the Pancho Barnes dogs? No? Another one of my macabre stories. Okay, because another one of my old-time newspaper people that I worked with swore that Pancho was dead for several days before she's discovered, because she's just living out in this like half-trailer kind of thing, and she's got all these dogs, and her arm is gone by the time she is found. Now, the guy I worked with said that he thought there was some foul play, that her arm had been surgically removed, that he had seen the autopsy report, and that's what it said. And I don't know about that. But then later on, I'm doing a story on a woman who took in stray dogs at a dog ranch outside of Rosamond. And as I'm looking at all these dogs, she's got hundreds of dogs there. She introduces me to some of the dogs that are in fact descendants of Pancho Barnes' dogs. So I thought, oh goodness, descendants of the flesh-eating dogs of Pancho Barnes. There they are right there, and they're still running around the Antelope Valley.
I wouldn't spread that one too far.
It never made the press. But I did, right? Yeah, I talked to this lady because she was having trouble with Kern County or whether or not her dogs were under proper care or not, and it was just one of those messy kind of things.
And what year did she die?
Pancho died in 75, I'm pretty sure. I didn't get here till 85, so she'd been gone for a few years.
Yeah, I actually saw her. We lived in Boron, and I saw her in the post office.
Yes, see, there.
But we were there 73 to 77, and she did die in 75. It must have been close to her death, because she showed up at the post office with these silk bloomers and hiking boots.
Whoa.
Movie should be made about her.
Yeah. Oh, she was just a character. Oh, yeah. And she was really a real pilot. There's theories that Amelia Earhart was more like a creation, that she was created as a publicity thing. You know, she was Lady Lindy, that she was picked. Because her first famous flight, she was made famous for. She did not fly the plane. She just flew along in it. But it was dangerous back then, so flying anywhere was dangerous. And so there's this theory that she really wasn't a pilot. Pancho was probably a born pilot. She arranged a union among the flyers who flew in the movies, because they said that we're performing these dangerous stunts. Because back then you would film a midair crash by having the planes crash in midair. There was no computer-generated footage then. You actually crashed the airplanes, and so guys would die filming these planes. And so she helped them stand up for themselves. And like I said, she just seems to be a character. You could see her pop up in the pages of the Valley Press over the years. There's the one time when she got a ticket, I think driving on Sierra Highway, because she had her truck loaded down, her Studebaker truck loaded down with pigs in the back. And so the headlights were up like that, and they blinded some oncoming highway patrol officer who whipped around and gave her a ticket for that. And she, of course, fought it in court. I think she fought it in the Newhall court, but she got the ticket anyway. And I think that Studebaker truck's driver's side door is now in the Edwards Air Force Base Museum, because there's one that says, I think it says Rancho Fly In. I think that's what it says, one of the names of Pancho's dude ranch and hotel that she had out there.
Real quick, do you want to, before we end this, do you want to fill us in on a little bit of the famous movie stars that live in Antelope Valley?
Oh, well, the two.
You know who they are, right?
I do. I do know the two of them.
Two of them.
The two most famous ones are Judy Garland and John Wayne. John Wayne lived in the Antelope Valley. I have one letter writer who periodically would remonstrate with me for not writing more about John Wayne. John Wayne was only about 6 to 8 years old when he lived here. His family was very poor homesteaders, and there wasn't much to be said about that. But his dad was another person with a lung ailment. He took up a homestead south of Lancaster. I think it's around Sierra Highway and Avenue L, as near as I can tell. And tried to make a go of farming there in 1914. There's a couple of oblique references to this and a couple of John Wayne biographies, but most of the facts we've got about John Wayne's time here is because he wrote a couple of letters to a guy named Glenn Settle, who's married into the family that owned Tropical Gold Mine west of Rosamond, and who was just kind of a one-man history society, wrote several books about history of the Antelope Valley, mostly stuff that he remembered, and collected a lot of historical artifacts. So he had heard that John Wayne had lived here, and so he wrote to Wayne and says, "Is this really true?" And he says, "Yes, in fact, I lived here." And so from the biographies, it was not a happy time. His mother did not want to live in the desert on a desolate ranch while they're trying to grow stuff out in the desert with no rain. And one of the stories Wayne told is how one morning they woke up and jackrabbits had eaten all their crops. He also said he was always frightened of the rattlesnakes. He'd have nightmares about the rattlesnakes. And one of the stories about him that he told in this letter is that, as he called it, some of the nosy biddies of the town had accused him of mistreating his horse. He would ride a horse to school while he was 6 years old. The grammar school is in downtown Lancaster, just south of Lancaster Boulevard. In fact, it still exists there. You can't see it. It's behind the Lancaster School District office, but there's still parts of it visible there. And so he said that there was something wrong with the horse. It was just skinny. It wasn't his fault. And he says the reason he thinks that this complaint came up is he'd let another boy ride the horse, and the boy had fallen off. And so that's made whoever said the nosy biddies of the town mad at him. And one of the things I thought was fascinating is that the school that he built in the new Lancaster Grammar School, that was the third or fourth one they had, but it had just opened. He was one of the first classes of students to be there, to attend classes there. And for some reason, there had been some sort of population boom that year. So when the school opened, they didn't have enough desks for the littlest kids there. So John Wayne was one of those kids who had to sit two to a desk because the school board had to order some new desks for them because they didn't expect there to be that many. So I don't know why, I don't know if there's some sort of real estate push going on, and that's why Wayne's family ended up there, along with other ones, or what was going on. Because this is right before the start of World War II. There wasn't really anything going on in the valley. It just emerged from a bad drought. There was some employment from the Los Angeles Aqueduct being built, so all those things were going on. And then, of course, Judy Garland lived here for several years. She lived in 3 houses here in Lancaster. They're all still there. And one of them was, in fact, the grandest house in Lancaster in the 1930s. She came here, and I'm going to get this wrong, I think she was about 5 or 6. She was the youngest of her 4 sisters. She was known as Baby. And they stayed until the mom was bringing them down to Los Angeles, getting them movie jobs. So she moved out, I think about 34. It's kind of uncertain as to when the family, because there's obviously difficulties between Mom Gum and Dad Gum, and because she was Frances Gum, she wasn't Judy Garland, but the Gum sisters were here. Their dad Frank Gum owned the theater in town. It was on Sierra Highway. It's about where the parking lot for the Antelope Valley Union High School District offices are, so just a little bit south of Lancaster Boulevard on the west side of Sierra Highway. So that's where his theater was. He'd rented that. He didn't build it, but he rented it, and he showed movies there. His daughters performed in between movies, and they, unlike John Wayne, who leaves no record of his passing in the Antelope Valley, by that time there was a couple of newspapers in town, and the Gum sisters seem to be all over the place. So you can find references to the Gum sisters, to Baby Gum, to Frank Gum, to the movie theater. You can find them because the girls would perform for, the women's club, and their mom would play the piano for them and things like that. And there were still people around. I think they all might be dead now who knew them. I talked to a woman who'd gone to a birthday party at the Gum house. So the Gums lived first over on Lancaster Boulevard within a block of the high school. They lived over there. Then they moved to another house over on Cedar, and then they moved to the house next door to that. And that's where they spent most of their time. That house is still there. It was described as the biggest house in Lancaster, so that would be why Frank Gum would have to live there. It's a big house. It's been used on and off as a flop house. I don't know who's living there now. For a while, it's a daycare thing. It's caught on fire about 15 years ago, when we thought the whole thing was going to go. It was being used as I call it a flop house. It was like, drug addicts and whatnot were living there. I don't know how many people. They had about 20 people living there. And I think it was one of their weird jury-rigged electrical things that caught the thing on fire. And I was lucky that nobody got killed in that, because I ended up going in there. The staircase to the upstairs was only about this wide. It was not a standard-sized staircase. So the fire started upstairs, and all these guys had to run out there. But so yeah, she lived there for a long time. And so since they left, and these are just their biographies that have come out now, that says that Frank Gum had a reputation for liking teenage boys, and that Mrs. Gum was having an affair with a guy, 3 blocks down the road down there, whose house is also still there. I don't know about any of that, but it wasn't anything that would make the newspapers back then. Though one of my coworkers says that he swears that there was an advertisement in an old newspaper where Frank Gum is pleading with people to come and see his theater. And this is sometime after Mrs. Gum and the girls go off, as she's bringing them around trying to get them jobs in the movies and radio. But yeah, so the 2-story house, kind of a craftsman style kind of house on the southwest corner of Cedar and New Grove is where Judy Garland lived for several years.
Frank Zappa.
Frank Zappa.
Don't forget him.
So Frank Zappa, the founder of the Mothers of Invention, he was the son of a rocket scientist out at Edwards Air Force Base. He graduated from Antelope Valley High School in 58, 59, I can't remember, 58 or 59. He did not have a happy teenagehood in Antelope Valley. I don't know if he would have any place, but there were stories about him. He had stories that the police would hassle him, and that they claimed that he was arrested once just to stop him from having his band perform at the women's club. He had a racially mixed rock and roll band, which was not done. His fellow bandmates, and she's still got fellow bandmates who are around her. I think there's still a few around. Some of them lived in Sun Village, which was the black community back then, because if you were black and you tried to look for a house in Lancaster, certainly into the 60s, you'd get steered over to Sun Village. So Frank Zappa references to the Antelope Valley in some of his songs. He had one called Village of the Sun. He's got another one called Billy the Mountain that has a reference to Rosamond in it. He had these bands called the Blackouts and the Omens. There were stories, he had, again, stories that, the sheriff's deputy would pull he and his friends over and dismantle their cars there along the street, just looking for anything they might possibly have in there. I think there's some of his, there's a story that he's there at high school, at AV High School, not the one that's there now, same site, but a different building that would have been back then. And that they're at an assembly, and the head cheerleader, it's always got to be the head cheerleader in the story, tells them, please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. And she looks around and says, you too, Frank Zappa, because he's still sitting there in the bleachers. But then there's also people who say, well, he says he was, that he was abused and not accepted, but, he was allowed to give a solo guitar performance at the high school, I think in the gymnasium too. So I don't know, it just could be teenage angst and all that. And I think that there is, in fact, right now, an electrical circuit called Zappa in the Western Antelope Valley. There's somebody who worked for Edison with a sense of humor applied that name to it. And yeah, like I said, they're still friends. There still could be some of them around. Yes, ma'am.
Did you know Merle Adams when she worked for the AV Press?
No, she was before me.
And she went to AV High too, right?
Oh, could be, because she wrote the Acton history.
Right.
Yeah, no, that was before my time, or if she was, because I came in '85, and so I don't think she was even writing a column. Yeah.
And she did write the story of the pulp mill too.
Of the what?
The pulp mill, the paper mill.
Oh, the paper mill, yeah,
She wrote that too.
Yeah, and so I ended up digging around in like Los Angeles Times archives, and I'll tell you, that's one of the now that there's digital archives, those are a big help, because you can go onto the LA Times digital archive and look it up, and put in a name, Acton. You can put in an Acton and find those stories in there. We are not, the Valley Press is all on microfilm. There's microfilms of us at Palmdale office. There's microfilms of the Ledger Gazette, which was the Lancaster newspaper that closed in the '80s, up in the Lancaster office, but they're not digitized. So there's no way of searching through there without going back and finding a date and looking up the. You can find the newspaper stories, but you have to either spend an enormous amount of time going frame by frame through all those microfilm rolls, or if you know what date something occurred, then go and look at it. Try to find that one. No, I've talked to the city of Palmdale people if they ever want to. Apparently it's quite expensive to do that.
It is. But it's history.
Yeah. I haven't talked to anybody in the city of Palmdale in quite a while. You guys should get a grant and digitize all those things. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff in there.
On some of the pictures that you had up on the screen.
Those are his. Those are mine.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Who is that skinny guy on the drilling rig?
What is what?
The skinny guy in the drilling.
on that drilling rig.
Oh, that was me. The drilling well up behind the boiling point in 1972. Water well.
That's the Bill Keener.
How far did you have to drill back? How far back?
Oh, on an average, probably 250, 300 feet.
In the Acton area?
Yeah, it depends on where
How
you're
long
at.
are you still drilling?
No.
I was just wondering how much that's changed,
That's changed a lot. They've got to go a lot deeper now.
and there's pockets, especially in
It depends on where you're at.
Yeah, well, there's pockets all over, especially out of Dulce, where there's,
Yeah.
some of them have water, up the road they don't have it.
We never drilled a dry one. It was different then, rotary mud. Now they have got the air rigs, they can do the same thing in a day. That took us a week. So this all changed a lot.
So, yes,
This is a long shot, but I remember reading maybe 10 years ago in the LA Times archive of a plane crash in the Sierra Pelonas.
Oh, yeah.
30s, 40s, or 50s?
30s,
30s, okay.
yeah. Hang on, let me find it.
That's that one that Sarah was asking about.
I think we should, if you guys have any more questions, you can stay up. We're going to button this up here
Okay.
as soon as he's done.
I was going to say, this was probably the 1938 crash of a Lockheed Super Electra.
Sounds right.
9 died, so it's a Northwest Airlines vice president, a Lockheed test pilot, a Lockheed vice president's wife, a Northwest engineer, and his family were among the 9 people killed May 16, 1938, when a brand new Lockheed Super Electra airliner smashed into a mountainside while trying to fly through cloud banks that billow every spring over the Sierra Pelona Mountains. Let me see if I can figure out. So it was flying up Sierra Highway, which was called Mint Canyon back then, when it hit the top of a ridge. And it says Stroh Peak, and I don't know which one Stroh Peak.
Yeah, I know exactly where.
Do you?
Yeah, you go up Shannon, was that Shannondale, Shannon Valley?
Shannon Valley's the one over
Shannon
there.
Valley proceeds with Sierra Highway, Shannon Valley goes parallel with Sierra Highway.
Okay, so you go Shannon Valley, make the right, go all the way back,
Mhm.
and there's a paved road that goes to the top. They call it Hauser Mountain.
Yeah.
Okay, right, there's a gate there now that says.
Are you talking about like Shannon View
Yeah,
Telephone Road?
yeah, you go all those roads
That's
back
above
there.
my house.
Yeah,
Now
you go
it's-
back
I
there.
didn't
Goes
realize.
back roads and up to the top of Howell.
Yeah, when you get all the way to the top, there's a gate there that says Santa Monica Conservatory or
Right,
something.
right.
Maybe-
Fair Ranch Park, yeah.
Maybe a quarter mile past that gate on the left, it's not very far off the road, maybe 25, 30 feet, you'll see the landing gear sticking out.
Well, you know,
That's, I wonder what, it was like a cone thing, and then it was burnt up in the 1980s.
No, that's before that.
Before that.
Yeah, there was another wreck down in the
there's
bottom of that.
a lot of wrecks in Hauser Mountain, I think.
Yeah.
I think there's a P-38 that wrecked up there.
Yeah.
Hauser or McDill. I didn't realize it was a paved road. I tried to get through there from the Bouquet Canyon side. I ended up driving my Suburban, four-wheel drive Suburban on the Pacific Crest Trail because it was wider than what I thought was a Forest Service road. And I never got to where we were going to.
Yeah.
Great view in the summertime, but this time of year it's the wind's so killer.
Yeah, see, I was coming in from a Palmdale perspective. Oh, yeah, look, my Forest Service map shows this nice road right up here. Oh, no way.
Yeah, it's paved.
Oh, but from this side.
You go on the dirt for a while, then you hit the pavement again,
Yeah.
go to the top.
Yeah, I think they're.
You guys, I want to wrap this up for everybody. I want to thank you, Chuck, for
Okay.
your time and
Well,
your
thank you for
knowledge.
bringing up to me.
Very impressed. If you guys have any more questions, we have a little time left in the library. You can hit them up before we leave.
And like I said, anybody who wants any of these books, these were from a year ago. I just bring them back to the office. You don't want any, but you're welcome to have them.
Thank you very much.
It's all Valley's press centric. And we've got, but it's got lots of, neat stuff in it. Not so much action stuff. So thank you very much for being so gracious and.
Thank you.
Thank you.